Buying a drone is just the first step to producing awesome drone content. Learning how to use it adequately, safely, and to its fullest potential is an entire learning curve of its own. My name is Edward, and today I want to talk about and demonstrate 5 tips to instantly improve your footage. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to this channel, as well as turning on those notification bells. That way you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. I've added timestamps down below for your convenience, as well as all the links to all the gear that I use for my videos. So without any further ado, let's fly right into the video. As I mentioned before on this channel, I actually started flying a drone before I learned cinematography. What that means is that I learned the properties that go into flying a drone and making it an extension of myself before I learned about the camera and its amazing capabilities, which is the actual reason you should buy a DJI drone. If you are only interested in buying a drone to be able to fly it and not focus on the cinematography, you're probably better off flying a DJI Mavic Mini 2 or an FPV drone. With all that being said, the first step that goes into improving your drone videos and photos is by being able to expose your photos and videos properly. So let's jump in our remote controller. It is really important to understand shutter speed and frames per second. It's easy. The more frames per second you have selected, the darker your image will be. For example, 120 frames per second is extremely fast and therefore will allow you to fly very quickly without having to worry about a choppy video clip, but the cost is an overall darker image. Same goes for your shutter speed. The faster your shutter speed, for example 1/1000, the less choppy your image will be, but at the cost of a darker image. A faster shutter speed also means less motion blur. So the question is, how do I combine frames per second with shutter speed to create a beautiful cinematic video clip? Well, let's say you want to shoot some cinematic video. The preferred frame rate for cinematic video is arguably around 24 frames per second. 24 frames per second is actually very slow, creating a lot of motion blur with every camera and subject movement, and can therefore result in a choppy image if you pan or tilt or move your drone too quickly, because there aren't sufficient frames to record the fast movements your drone is making. However, 24 frames per second, since it is a low frame rate, allows a lot of light into the sensor. For the ideal cinematic settings, here's the trick. Set your frame rate at 24 frames per second and set your shutter speed at exactly double your frame rate. In this case, with 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be set to 1/50 since 1/48 is not an option. This is important because not only does it expose your settings accordingly to the light in the scene, but also creates the most natural looking motion blur to the human eye. So from now on, when you're going to fly your Mavic or any other drone that you may own, make sure to always have your shutter speed to double your frame rate. I hope I've made myself clear so far. Make sure to smash that like button if you haven't done so already. Now that we know the professional basics of exposing your image properly, now we need to talk about ISO and aperture. Now that you've figured out your frame rate and shutter speed, it's time to figure out what aperture and what ISO to use. Frame rate and shutter speed are used to set the overall feeling of the video. Aperture and ISO are used to further adjust and refine the exposure. ISO is used to artificially increase the brightness of the light that's already present in your image. In order for ISO to work well without making your image look all grainy and noisy, you need a large enough camera sensor. The DJI Mavic 2 Pro comes with a 1-inch sensor, which is quite amazing for a drone. However, I strongly discourage using ISO on your DJI Mavic 2 Pro unless you really have to. Even though a 1-inch sensor is bigger than most sensors in everyday drones, 1 inch is still way too small to crack your ISO all the way up. If you are going to use ISO for your Mavic, try not to go above 200 ISO. If you have made it this far in the video, congratulate yourself because you're learning things that are essential to producing beautiful cinematic drone footage. In our case, on a Mavic 2 Pro, the ideal aperture to have the sharpest looking image is actually 5.6. However, it's possible that with the combination of 24 frames per second, 1/50 shutter speed, and an aperture of 5.6, your image may still be way too bright and may completely overexpose your image during daylight. So how do we overcome this obstacle? Well, if I want to keep my frame rate at 24 frames per second, my shutter speed at 1/50, and my aperture at 5.6, we are going to need something called neutral density filters, which takes us to tip number 2. Neutral density filters, also known as ND filters, come in handy as the perfect solution to compensate for overexposure while keeping your ideal cinematography settings. The DJI ND filters that I own come in various stop numbers. The ones that I own are ND4, 8, 16, and 32. The numbers simply represent the number of stops. Alternatively, you could ditch the ND filters and set your aperture, also known as f-stop, to a higher stop, like f11. However, that would defeat the entire purpose of keeping the sharpest cinematic settings to f5.6. Have you ever tried making a hyperlapse? Have you ever experimented with ND filters? Make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know your experience, your successes, and your failures. If you have experimented with them, you would know that ND filters are also extremely important if you want to capture fast-moving subjects in a photo or in a time-lapse. If you want to learn about hyperlapses, I made a video that covers A to Z steps to producing breathtaking hyperlapses, and you can find that video right here. Tip number 3, composition. I recommend you guys always plan your flights ahead of time. Use Google Maps or Google Earth to get the most out of your flight, as well as your batteries. Pre-plan on Google Maps by setting your maps to satellite and 3D view to see what's around the area, and then you can write down the types of shots you plan to take. This will allow you to arrive on set and compose your image in a matter of seconds instead of wasting precious battery time and try guessing on the spot what shot is going to look good. Of course, sometimes improvised compositions are perfectly acceptable as well. It's about how you feel in the moment and what looks beautiful in the moment. But I do strongly recommend to do a site survey beforehand. Tip number 4, D-Log-M, HLG, and normal. These are simply the 3 picture profiles that come integrated with your Mavic 2 Pro. Starting with normal, this is a preset picture profile that the Mavic naturally shoots in, which looks great, especially for beginner cinematographers. This mode shoots in 8-bit color, so normal is not the highest quality option within your Mavic 2 Pro. In fact, HLG and D-Log-M both shoot in 10-bit color, which means that the HLG and D-Log-M can produce 1,053,300,000 more colors than 8-bit. Sounds like a lot, right? And it is. While normal produces an immediately saturated and graded footage, D-Log-M produces an extremely flat and unsaturated image which right off the camera looks really bad. The main difference is that with normal you can shoot, put it on your computer, and it's already graded for you. You can upload it to YouTube or your favorite sharing platform in a matter of seconds without having to worry about color grading the footage. Maybe you can expose the highlights a little bit better and the shadows a little bit better and maybe the saturation. But with D-Log-M, it's up to you to create the colors, the saturation, and the contrast in post. So for beginners, I would recommend starting with normal and learning how to compose your image, as well as learning good time management with your batteries, site surveys, and just getting better with your drone overall first and foremost. And then start worrying about how to grade your footage properly in post-production using HLG right after normal. And then once you start getting good at HLG and know how to set your contrast and saturation and highlights and shadows and all that good stuff, then move to D-Log-M, which is the most challenging, but in the end, the most lucrative picture profile within your Mavic 2 Pro. Tip number 5, slow dynamic movements. Combining 24 frames per second with slow drone movements will get you the ultimate cinematic visuals. The drone is not only meant to whip around the air quickly while recording video. Be strategic with your shots. Shoot complex, dramatic, long shots. It's really good practice. If you're not good at flying slowly on positioning mode, then simply switch to tripod mode. Get familiar with your remote controller and your drone's maneuverability. I just simply can't say that word, I'm from Italy. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments below so I can answer them. I hope this video was helpful. Make sure to subscribe and like this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.